So what are you writing your essay about?
It's just sort of about like the codification of these rules of society that sort of like govern everything. And if you sort of think about it like one layer removed in the abstract, it's sort of like, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about codification, it kind of reminds me of there's kind of this instinct that I think a lot of people want to jump into things and they want to just make it really immediate, you know what I mean? Like, there's not a lot of, like, to kind of, like, I think one of the values in life that we kind of take for granted,
Like a hierarchical thing, like you don't have to measure these sort of things in like their importance because it's really all too subjective to be able to do that. It's
when I think about it, it's like you do really need to, like, step before things.
so I think you have to sort of take everything from its relational meaning.
I'm not talking about, like, I don't mean to be, like, in a way that's sort of trying to, you know, relegate someone to a different status so as to put myself up, you know, like, I'm not trying to play those kind of politics.
It's sort of like a nuanced thing.
Yeah, and I mean, like, when I think about things in relation, you know, what the thing is that, like, you can think of yourself as this being an abstract and you kind of just put yourself in there, and then it's like, you kind of, like, you're only really yourself when you're interacting with people, and so if you kind of to look into the substrate, like, there's something kind of uncanny, you know what I mean? Like, Freud says this whole theory about, like, cognitive issues, and it's actually, like, this sort of repression, but it reminds me of, like, what Lacan says, because he has this sort of whole philosophy where it's, like, very complicated, and he thinks about things.
To my friend the other day about this essay she's writing, and she was bringing Foucault into it, and I think it's just interesting that everything sort of, like, relates back to each other in that sort of way where,
well, because if you think about it, what Foucault kind of writes about in Discipline and Punish, when you think about it, this hegemonic structure, like, it's not like the panopticon. I mean, it's like a literal, actual, like, a structure that you think about too, and then you put in, like, the people, and like, there is something very conceptual about it, and I think that you can take in the abstract, and you can also put it kind of in a position where it's, like, something that you could, like, really make something, like, physical material out of it, you know, like, if we want to think about something like a material onto it, where opposed to there's, like, also sort of another lens where you could take it where it's just something metaphysical, and I think that both are, like, other ways of exteriorizing this kind of, like, there's, like, a plurality, and, like, well, kind of if you take that and then you think about it, but not necessarily to take it as axiomatic, but, you know, like,
well, it's interesting you bring up the panopticon because it's sort of this idea that maybe the Christian God is sort of a panopticon in the way that sort of thinking that makes sense, because my other friend the other day, there's always, like, just of general society and the fact that in an urban sphere like we are.
And so when you think about Derrida, like obviously, because Derrida doesn't come into play with this, because he kind of does this thing where it's like, well, it's actually deconstruction, but it's like when you take something and you set it in different, like, tones, and you can see, like, how it actually, like, isn't just in one thing or the other. And so are they really these two things that are, like, really just one thing and another, or is it something more complicated where they're maybe not so? And, like, it, you know, reminds me of kind of this Foucauldian discourse about
people think of him as always watching them.
You want to say, like, oh, but here's something where you can be abstract, and then this is this place where you can actually, like, put into these applications. I just think that it's interesting to think about when you use that, like, an actual application, like, into this Victorian era of kind of repression, I actually, like, apply, like, when you kind of put it into the structure of, like, meaning, and I just think that it's really, you know what I mean? Like, you don't even really need to write it all down.
I was actually thinking about the Victorian era, started all this discourse and mass media sex scandals that drove discourse of mutilation and brutal Jack the Ripper, a public image of male violence in the form of murder of prostitutes. And so it just sort of all relates back to the central point.